Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Generic Geek podcast. This is episode 25. I am not with Colin this week because I have a special guest instead. I am here with Scott Niswander from NerdSync Productions. Scott, thanks for joining me for a few minutes today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Now, you do NerdSync, which is a YouTube channel. It used to be a podcast. Tell us a little bit about what you do for those who may not be familiar.
I'm actually surprised that you knew that it used to be a podcast. Yeah, it started out that way many years ago. And then I got into the YouTube space and started talking about comic books and superheroes. And it started off really simple, talking about like histories of characters and just little questions that I had as a fairly new comic book reader. And some of my friends had as well. And it kind of evolved over time to using comic books and superheroes to teach about real world things, real world history, philosophy, science, culture, arts, that kind of stuff. Because I was never a really good student in school. Teachers weren't teaching me things in a way that was interesting to me. So I try to almost like trick people into learning about things because the world is interesting. If only people would teach us about the world through things that we're already interested in. So that's kind of what I do. That's kind of my whole thing, I guess.
So how did your interest in comic books start? Have you been a lifelong fan? Did somebody give you a comic one day and say, read this? And you're like, hey, wait, what have I been missing out on? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my dad is actually a huge comic book nerd. So I mostly get it from him. He's been collecting comic books and reading them ever since, him and my mom were dating. So if anything, that gives me hope that one day I will find a person who will tolerate my comic book loving goodness. But yeah, so I grew up under him. I was the only kid out of a big family that actually shared an interest in comic books with him. And I just loved, it wasn't even so much comic books themselves. It was just, I loved superheroes. I loved the idea of superheroes. And so he would take me, one-on-one to go see the first Spider-Man movie or the first X-Men movie. And those were some of the first movies I remember seeing in theaters. And I just remember just loving it so much, just seeing these characters flying around and swinging and fighting crime in these cool costumes. I'm just like, this is so cool. And then I would just get into the comic book space through him, asking him questions and reading some of his collection, and just kind of evolved from there slowly but surely. And mostly I wouldn't have money to buy my own comic books. And then very quickly afterwards, my parents actually got divorced. So he wasn't around that much anymore. So I couldn't read his comic book collection as much as I was as a kid. So mostly I would learn about comic books and superheroes through like Wikipedia was a thing that was becoming new at around the time when I was starting to. So I would just read long wiki articles about my favorite heroes and characters and stuff like that, and then that's pretty much how I would learn about superheroes and stuff, and slowly but surely continue my love of them.
I think my story is very similar to yours. My parents were divorced. I would go with my dad on the weekends. He would read me, and this is going to date me here, but yeah, he would read me the Frank Miller Daredevil run.
Oh, nice.
For bedtime stories. I mean, that was my bedtime story. And then
bedtime story.
And then I remember as a kid, my very first Superman comic book that was given to me was Superman 401. And I still have it to this day. And a family friend gave it to me. I was homesick. He brought it over so I'd have something to read. Paid 60 cents or 75 cents or whatever it was. And that just kind of started me down the path. And then in 92, when they had the death of Superman, my dad, he's like, oh, this is a big deal. He likes comics, so he just bought me like everything.
Yeah.
He bought me black bag issues, newsstand issues, graphic novel collection, everything. And that kind of reignited me. But there's so much that I didn't know, so I hit Wikipedia. Yeah. And I would go back, and I to this day I'll still hit Wikipedia. I don't know about this character. Mm-hmm. Let's go and check it out. Now, you talk a lot about the history and the philosophy and things like that. How did you start getting there from I like superheroes to
Mhm.
what is the history and how does it apply to our society today?
That's a really interesting question, and I've never really thought about it. Um I think it started with probably books like there are these very blatant books that are called like Batman and Philosophy, Superman and Philosophy, Avengers and Philosophy. Many years later, after I started reading those, the one of the editors and authors and contributors to those books is one of my good friends now. So that's just a funny way that kind of worked out. But it might have started with those. It probably started with other YouTube channels who were doing similar things, but not necessarily with superheroes and comics. I remember the channel Game Theory was a pretty big inspiration, where he was trying to do like the science of games and stuff like that. And I'd be like, ooh, I want to try the science. Like really early on, I tried doing science things. I am not good at science things. So when I was trying to do this stuff early on, I would get so much wrong. I remember our second most popular video to date with over 1 million views on it, is one. It was originally titled "The Science of Thor's Hammer." I've since changed the title because I didn't want to advertise the science part of it because I got so much science wrong. But I would say things like, there's no gravity in space, and then just get berated in the comments from people being like, of course there's gravity in space, you moron. So it probably started with the science aspect of it, and then it very slowly moved towards real world history was stuff that I started to find really interesting as I was looking up. That probably just happened naturally. As I was looking up the history of the lore of the character, I would find stories about like, well, what was this artist and writer duo thinking when they were coming up with this character? What was going through their minds? And then I would learn these really fascinating stories of like, oh, so Venom was created because like the backlash of the fans, they didn't like the black costume, so they had to make the symbiote evil and like that. And I just learned a bunch of really interesting things, and I learned about myself that I love history. And it's something that growing up in school, I never loved history. I hated history. It was my least favorite subject. And suddenly it's the thing that I can't get enough of in my life, is learning about just people, real life people and their lives and events and how they came up with these things that are now cultural phenomenons. And and then that paired with psychology, probably philosophy came last because that was another really difficult one for me to understand, and I'm still learning. But that's kind of the thing. That's kind of the vibe that I want to give off on the channel that maybe I don't necessarily always do, which is like, I'm not an expert in anything. I'm a guy who just likes to learn, and I like to ask questions, and I like to try to figure out things, and I want to share with you the stuff that I learned. And if I'm wrong, which I most likely am, let me know in the comments. Let's continue a discussion. So that's hopefully the vibe I give off. I think most people don't perceive it that way, but I don't know. That's what I think.
Now, as a YouTuber, I mean, YouTube comments are brutal. YouTube
Yeah.
commenters can, what does that do to your psyche as you're reading through? You've poured your heart into this video. You think you've got an amazing piece that you're putting out there. And then you've got somebody just lighting you up in the comments. What does that do to your psyche?
Man, I got to tell you, I remember the very first negative YouTube comment that I got. And I'm curious if other YouTubers remember their very first one too. But I remember it because it just destroyed me. I was just making videos in my spare time. I'd put maybe like 10 or so up, and mostly to just a positive response, because it was mostly just my friends and family watching and wasn't really being discovered. And then some person just wrote this really horrible kind of comment about things like, you missed this, you're an idiot, how could you do blah, 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 and your on-screen personality is horrible, which they were right, by the way. My earlier videos are terrible.
Our early podcasts are unlistenable too.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about there.
I joke sometimes that I have a 1 month gap where like everything that I've made within the last month, I'm fine with. If it's older than a month, I hate it. It's the worst thing ever. But I remember this comment, and I left a reply. And I'm a pretty positive person in general. I think I've maybe gotten a little bit more cynical as life has progressed, but back in those days, I was a very positive person. And so I would kind of responded with the attitude of like, kill them with kindness a little bit. Just be polite, be like, yeah, you're right. I did miss this thing. I'm really sorry about that. I'm working on blah, blah, blah. And I remember I hit, reply, and I turned off my computer, and I went to my room, and I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move. And I like slept as a way to get away from the world, as is my natural defense mechanism, just sleeping all the time. So then I woke up a couple hours later, and I wanted to check to see if that person had responded to my response to them. And they did. And they were just like, hey, I didn't mean to be negative. I was just having a bad day. And I was like, oh man, that's interesting to me. The fact that this person left a comment that he didn't know would destroy me, that he didn't know I would carry that experience with me for the rest of my life, all because he had a bad day. And, just fired something off because he needed to get, something out. So that experience changed my viewpoint on negative comments. Most of the time, I try to give everyone the benefit of the doubt and just say, they're probably having a bad day. They don't mean it. And so, yeah, I still try to do that. I still try to be polite to people who disagree with me. I have a very hard and fast rule about negative comments, though, which is you can insult me however much you want, but if you start insulting other commenters who were not instigating, who, if you're coming in and you're picking on the people who took the time out of their day to watch my videos, I'm not having it. You're out of here. But if you're like, boy, this guy on camera is a real moron, I'll be like, yeah, that works. That's a comment. I'll keep that in there. Yeah. Fair enough. But yeah, that's kind of my...
over the years, I've made the comment multiple times. I'm just an idiot with a microphone. That's really what we are. And we try and do what we do, but we're not perfect. We're going to screw up. And, we joke about the fact that, we'll talk about things that are way out of our wheelhouse on our show normally. Mm-hmm. And it just, we have some dedicated listeners who know that ain't right, and they'll light us up. And we know full well that we're going to get lit up because we don't know what we're talking about.
Oh man. When I used to do my podcast, and people would complain all the time, like, why don't you guys do research about the subjects you're going to be talking about? And I was like, because the whole point of our podcast at the time was it's just a group of friends talking, and I don't want to have to do research to talk to my friends.
Exactly.
I just want to talk with my friends.
Now, thankfully, we do know most of what we talk about, but you get in, there's always some anomaly that comes up. Oh, yeah. So now I want to ask you, you mentioned that you were fascinated with superheroes. Mm-hmm. Who are some of your favorites?
So it's something that's always constantly changing. Spider-Man was my favorite for the longest time. And that's probably just because he was one of the first superheroes I was introduced to.
Okay.
I watched the 90s cartoon series. I watched the movies with my dad. Man, those were the times when, you would have to wait years and years between superhero movies. I remember Spider-Man 2 coming out in 2004. And then someone being like, all right, then there'll be the third one in 3 years. And I'm like, I have to wait 3 years for another superhero movie?
Yeah.
And nowadays, you just get like a dozen of them in every year. But yeah, Spider-Man was my favorite for the longest time. I also feel like I may be related to him because of this idea that, he was a nerdy kid. Whatever. But that's since changed, especially in the comic books. Spider-Man has kind of grown up. He's no longer that nerdy high school kid. And so he became a little bit less relatable to me. So I went to characters like Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. One of my favorite characters, especially new characters within the past couple of years. She's basically, I would say she's the modern day Peter Parker. She's a character who's also this nerdy fanfic writing superhero obsessed girl who's totally unpopular and is trying to figure out life, and everything's kind of going wrong, and it's just a very modern take on what Peter Parker used to be. And that's the stuff that I connected with him with initially, so I connect with her now. And then people were going to judge me about this one, but my number one hero right now is Aquaman. And I'm not saying that as like some sort of like hipster dude who's just like, oh yes, Aquaman, I'm going to be a contrarian and love the thing that everyone hates. I started reading him as a joke when the New 52 launched, because I was just like, Aquaman's so stupid, I'm going to pick up his title and see how that is. Ha ha ha. And it was so good. It was so good that Aquaman quickly became my favorite hero to date, and it was fun. I just saw the Justice League movie the other day, and I was like, this is not the Aquaman that I know, but I'm so happy that he is just in the public eye right now that I don't even care. He's great.
You know, a lot of people seem to be jumping on the Aquaman bandwagon with Justice League coming out, and Jason Momoa especially. I mean,
Yes.
people love that guy, and with good reason. But you know, I remember back in the '90s when when they relaunched the Aquaman titles, and you had long hair, the beard, the harpoon hand.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember that, and I loved it. And you know, people even after that came out, oh, he talks to fish, what big deal. But no, dude, he's freaking awesome. I love Aquaman. So that's cool that you are a fan as well.
I love it. I love him so much.
Now, you mentioned you just saw Justice League. I haven't seen it yet. I did go see Thor recently. I'll be seeing Justice League in a couple days. But Marvel and DC have two very different approaches to their film franchises.
Yes.
And it seems like what Marvel is doing, they can't screw up, whereas DC can't seem to get anything right. Why do you think that is? I mean, DC has these epic characters that have been around for 75 years. Marvel's been around for what, 50? Something like that?
Yeah.
And so, you know, there is that difference in the history, but it seems like DC just can't quite get it right. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Marvel has been around for around the same length as DC, but a lot of their popular heroes didn't pop up until about
True. And they were something different before.
Yeah, they were called timely comics.
Yeah.
But I would say there are certainly Marvel movies that I don't care for, that I would say are worse than some of the DC movies, in my opinion. I think Thor: The Dark World is terrible and is easily a forgettable movie. And then you get on the DC side, and I just loved the Wonder Woman movie. I loved it. So I don't know. It's tricky. I think the difference between them lies in the difference between the publisher of what the publisher uses superheroes for, even in the comic books. Marvel tries to tell stories of people who just so happen to be these super beings. And so you'll get these very human stories of Tony Stark dealing with alcoholism, or you'll get a character like Spider-Man who's dealing with the death of a loved one and trying to grow up with these powers, and it's weird. You'll get they just want to tell stories of almost like street level just people who just so happen to be superheroes. But then you get DC on the other hand, and almost every one of their main heroes in the Justice League is otherworldly in some capacity. You get Batman, who's like your most human of all of them, but then you get Superman, who's an alien. You get Wonder Woman, who's from a civilization that's been kind of excluded from the rest of Earth. Aquaman, very similar scenario. Flash, a bit more human in that regard. But these characters, a lot of them are almost aspirational. They're not. Marvel tries to be like, this is who we are and what we struggle with as people. DC is, this is what we could be if we strive to be better. Superman is very much this character where people want to look up to him. He's the guy. He's like, yeah, he's this big blue Boy Scout, but he's if done right, he's this very motivational, inspirational, hopeful character that people can look up to, and as like a beacon of light in an otherwise dark, gritty world, which is what they should be doing in these movies, using Superman to be the lightness in this dark Snyderverse. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, I think it just comes down to a difference of how they use their characters, and it's a little bit tricky to write. I think it's trickier to write DC characters because of that difference.
I think you're right there. You know, I've had conversations with friends over the years, and DC characters are all gods.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they are, some of them literally.
Yeah.
But it's difficult to relate to a god. And I think that's why Marvel has had such success over the years, is because it's easy to relate to the high school nerd.
Yeah.
It's hard to relate to the guy from another planet who could destroy the earth if he so chose. I mean,
so, yeah, because even if you have a character like Thor, right, who is, for all intents and purposes, a god from another world, very similar to something like Wonder Woman or Superman. You saw Thor Ragnarok, right?
Yes.
Something that they do with him in basically all of the Thor movies, but it's super present in the first Thor movie and in Thor Ragnarok, is unlike Wonder Woman or Superman, where they're supposed to be these very benevolent, do-good, almost nearly perfect characters. Thor is a god, but he's still very broken as a as like a person, just as a you know, he stumbles around. He has a very large ego. He can't be wrong in any capacity. He always has to be like the big tough guy at the end of the day. And sometimes he's just an idiot, which is also fun to watch. So they still find ways to put these very human characteristics in this very godlike character, which is the trouble with something like Superman, where you want him to be this perfect being, because that's kind of who he is. And so it's tricky.
Yeah, definitely. Now, going back a little bit to NerdSync and what you do, you talk a lot about comic book history. You talk, one of my favorites that you do is comic misconceptions.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you have been surprised to have learned during those, whether it be the history? I mean, I know I was amazed when I found out the true history of Wonder Woman, with the whole, I mean, the bondage and all that weirdness going on behind the scenes there. That surprised me. What's some stuff that kind of caught you off guard, or that you thought, wow, this is really neat, or I did not know that?
Yes. There are a lot. How much time do we have? So the number one video that comes to mind a lot when I think about this is the real origin of Venom, because that is just a perfect storm of exactly how the comic book industry worked at that time. Just very briefly, and I might get some stuff wrong because I made this video in 2014, so it's been a while. But so they wanted to introduce a black costume for Spider-Man, and as part of a way to like create more toy sales, I think, because then you could have them in two different costumes and sell two different things. And it was going to be part of Secret Wars. So they released kind of I think they released the toy first, or like some concept art for Spider-Man, before they released the actual like the comic book where he got the costume. And fans hated it. They were like, I do not like this black costume on Spider-Man. It's very un-Spider-Man. I hate this. So they had to start weaving in a bit of a story of why Peter Parker would need to get rid of this costume, because the idea was it's a self-healing costume. It can disguise into its own clothing, so it can produce its own webbing. So it has all of these great benefits. Why would Spider-Man need to get rid of it? And we need to come up with a logical reason, because the fans hate it. And we can't just be like, Spider-Man's like, well, I don't like this anymore because it has all these other benefits. So we need a logical reason. And so what they came up with was that the suit was a symbiote that was kind of feeding off of him and bonding to him. And so they were like, ooh, now that's a reason why Spider-Man would not want to wear this costume. And so then they got rid of it. They turned it into a symbiote, which would later become the character of Venom. And it all happened because it was the comics creators responding to fan hate. And then to kind of round out the story, by the time they were penciling the story of Spider-Man getting rid of the costume, they had already like 6 or 8 issues out, something like that, with him in the black costume, because just that's how the way the industry worked. They were a little bit behind on everything. And fans were just like, actually, no, we like this. So then they had to create, they went back a couple issues later and just had him wear a regular cloth black costume that was exactly the same, but didn't have all those other benefits. And it was just, it was them trying to please the fans, but they couldn't quite do it. And I don't know. It's a story that's interesting to me. I don't know if I told it well, but I like it.
You would think that after all these years, you're not going to please the fans. The fans are going to be upset regardless. I mean, just look at any movie casting announcement. They're going to be upset regardless.
They're going to hate it, and you got to give them a little bit of time, and you might win some of them over. Like when they said Jason Momoa was going to be Aquaman and they released that first image of him, I was like, I hate this. This is not my Aquaman. And then as the movie started ramping up and I started seeing him in more behind the scenes stuff and more like clips from trailers, I was like, you know what? Never mind. I'm 100% on board with this. Let's do it.
Yeah. And I was just the opposite. I saw Momoa and I'm like, yes, they're doing the Aquaman from the 90s. He's going to be angry. He's going to, let's maybe get a harpoon for a hand going on. Yeah. But I was like that with Gal Gadot with the Wonder Woman announcement.
Oh, yeah.
But my concern, a lot of people are like, oh, her boobs aren't big enough. My concern was she's too skinny.
Yeah.
I didn't see her as an intimidating presence on the screen like I would picture Wonder Woman to be. But she proved me wrong. She beefed up for the role, and yeah. I'm happy to admit that I was very wrong on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to turn everyone against me really fast, but as someone who really genuinely thoroughly loves the Fast and the Furious franchise,
They're so fun.
I was excited when she was cast because I was like, yes, I love her.
Yeah, and I like her from those too. I mean, my concern wasn't her acting. My concern was she's just too skinny.
Yeah.
And thankfully she did a great job because
definitely
DC really needed that. Now you're branching out a little bit. You do your videos, but you're also working on a book.
Yes. Wow. You do your research, don't you?
Hey, I do what I can. So tell us a little bit about your book.
So it's tentatively titled The Real Origins of Your Favorite Superheroes or something like that. I don't know. The idea is that it takes the Real Origin series of videos that we do about the Venom story, for example, or about Fantastic Four, any crazy like comic book superhero or team or whatever. And it dives into the real world origins of how they were created. So like the Fantastic Four, to give another example, one of my favorite tiny tidbits of trivia about that is if you look at the first couple issues of Fantastic Four, you'll notice they're not wearing costumes on the covers. And that was very intentional. Marvel was trying to hide the fact that the Fantastic Four were superheroes because at the time, Marvel was publishing all of their comic books through a printer, through a publisher that was owned by DC Comics. So there was a time in history when every Marvel comic book was being printed by DC Comics. And so Marvel had to disguise the fact that they were printing superheroes. So they were just like, so that DC wouldn't threaten to like, well, no, we're not going to print these. You're competing directly with us.
Shut them down.
Yeah, exactly. So that is just a small taste of some fun, interesting history that you can get in a book that will be hopefully out sometime in the future. If you want updates on it, we have a website. It's called realoriginsbook.com. And you can sign up for a newsletter mailing list for more information about that. We've released, I think, a handful of chapters online for people to look at and give us feedback on. So that's been exciting and really fun. And it's been a fun journey.
That's awesome. So do you have any ETA on when that's going to be done, or just it's done when it's done?
Yeah, we don't even know how many chapters we want to write yet. We're just plugging away at it. We're writing new chapters every week, and we have a good amount done. Thankfully, we're just recycling a lot from the videos that I've written, while also updating the information and updating the flow of things. Because some of the videos I wrote years ago, and I've since become a slightly better writer since then. So we're updating it that way. And we're just writing brand new stuff that has never been in a video. And yeah, I don't know. We have a checklist. We have like a spreadsheet of all the characters that we're thinking about doing. Some of them might not pay off if it's not a particularly interesting story. And then we might add some more later. We don't even know, like, we just don't know what the cutoff should be. Like, is She-Hulk a character that's popular enough that people would want to read about her? I think so, but maybe not. So I don't know. There's not a particular ETA on it just yet, but we're hoping to get a first draft of the whole book done by early next year if we just keep chipping away week by week. So we'll see.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to that. I love stuff like that. In fact, you always talk about well, I shouldn't say always, but you will often reference books on your shows. And occasionally you'll hold them up and show them off, and I try and jot down, so I can go and pick it up for myself. What are some of the books that you really recommend for people who are interested in this type of stuff, comic book history and the unknown stories? And
you're gonna love a video I'm publishing in a couple weeks about book recommendations for this exact
sweet
purpose. Yes, I did it last year too, and people really loved it. And so I'm going to do it again with a lot more books. I have tons and tons of books. My library is constantly increasing. I have an Amazon wish list of just books that people sometimes send in my P.O. box, which is really nice. If I had to recommend just like a handful off the top of my head, the number one book I would recommend for just comic book trivia and history would be Brian Cronin's Was Superman a Spy? Despite the title, it's not solely about Superman. It's about Marvel, DC, and beyond. And it's very small, but it's packed with tons and tons and tons of great information. Those are great. If you want more history, I'm just looking around my room. The Comics Creators series by Tom DeFalco. It's Comics Creators on Spider-Man, Comics Creators on Fantastic Four, Comics Creators on X-Men. Those three are the only ones I think that are out. I don't know if there have been any more, but those are written interview style with the writers and artists of those characters. And it's just him talking about what they were thinking about as they were creating those comic books. It's really cool, really fast reads. I'm a fan of things that are really easy to digest because I was not a very good student in school. I was not a big fan of reading. So really quick things like that are helpful. Or audiobooks, I would say as well. If you're really into Marvel, the absolute must read would be Marvel Comics The Untold Story by Sean Howe. It's huge, and I've yet to get through all of it. I usually just kind of skip around to whatever section I need, but I've read over time. I've probably read approximately 80 to 90% of it, but it's just so big. I would recommend audiobook format for that one if you're like me, but it's an incredible resource for sure. And then one last one that I'm reading currently that's very good and very detailed is called The 10-Cent Plague by, oh no, I can't remember his name, but it's called The 10-Cent Plague, and it's all about the time in history during the 40s and 50s where comic books were on trial, and people were saying that they were the cause of juvenile delinquency. People were burning comic books. People were threatening to censor comic books, and there was the whole Comics Code Authority thing that happened. That book is also very long, but it is such a brilliant, easy, fast read that you just fly through it, and it's just packed with this great imagery of how all these people were reacting to everything. It's amazing.
That was with the Seduction of the Innocent and
Frederick Wortham's whole thing. The rise and fall of horror comics, essentially, which has been a really fun. Yeah, there's so much information that I just want to talk about, but it's just like, I'll skip it. I'll save it. It's awesome.
Save it for a video.
Yeah,
That'll be awesome. That'll be awesome. So, well, Scott, I appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule here and chatting with us. If people want to check out your videos, see what you're doing next, where's the best place for them to find you?
Boy, if people still want to hear my voice after I rambled for so long, you can probably go to youtube.com/NerdSync Productions, because youtube.com/NerdSync was taken before I came up with the name. But it's NerdSync Productions. That's where we publish new videos. You can also just, Twitter is usually where I'm most active. Either @NerdSync is for all our video stuff and announcements and whatnot. Or personally, if you just like me, you can go to my Twitter is just @Scott Niswander, which is also a difficult name to spell. So good luck. Godspeed.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. We do appreciate this. And yeah, listeners, go check out his stuff. I think I've mentioned your video channel on our shows before. But
oh, wow. Thank you.
yeah, like I said, I like what you do. What you're doing is important. People need to understand the history of comics and, so that it doesn't go away. There's so much that's happened in the last 75 years, 80 years.
Oh, man.
And if people don't know about it, then it's going to be lost. And we can't have that happening. Like you, I love history. I think it's very important to keep history in the forefront of our minds.
Yeah. I would also just say to anyone who might not particularly care about history, I would say give it a shot, because I was like you. I didn't really care about history growing up at all. But once you start diving into the history of something that you're interested in, it totally changes the game. And then you can start learning these little stories, and you'll start recognizing names and be like, oh yeah, I remember Jack Kirby. He did use that. And then he's connected to, oh, there's Roy Thomas over here. Whoa. Okay. And then you'll start remembering people, and you'll be like, well, that's interesting because this guy was over here at this I don't know. It's just, there's something magical about going to any date in history and learning about what happened about the subject that you love, and just really having a more full understanding of the stuff that you love. And yeah, I don't know. I love it.
Oh, definitely. So I don't know that I can finish any better than that. So that was awesome, Scott. Thank you. But quick shout out to our Patreon subscribers as well. If you like what we do, please check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/stolendroids. I always get that wrong, but patreon.com/stolendroids. Also, NerdSync's got a Patreon as well. So
that's correct.
Go check them out. And show Scott some love here for the stuff he's doing.
Yeah, that's actually where we publish new chapters of our book every week. So if you're interested, we take feedback. We give you a Google Doc that you can comment on and tell us if something is really boring, or if we missed something or got something wrong. You get to help contribute to the final book whenever that's out.
Nice. And is that patreon.com/NerdSync Productions?
No, that one is just NerdSync.
Just NerdSync?
Very confusing, I know. But.
All righty. So patreon.com/NerdSync. Go show some love over there as well. And again, Scott, thank you so much. I look forward to chatting with you some more down the road. And every week I look forward to your new content. So keep it up, my friend. It's good stuff you're doing there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
And all righty. Well, that is our show for this week, or this time. Weekly, monthly, whenever we do it. So until next time, good day.